Welcome to Sarder TV. I'm Vaishali Jain. We're excited to have David Mattson join us today. David is a best-selling author, a sales and management thought leader, and he's here to tell us about his new book, The Sandler Rules for Sales Leaders. Dave, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's my pleasure.
Tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, I was a client of Sandler back in '86. I went to Sandler reluctantly. I was pushed. I was one of those forced students sitting in a classroom thinking that I didn't need to be there, only because I thought sales was born. I didn't realize that you could be made a salesperson. I thought you either had it or you didn't have it. And then when I realized it was very conversational, I really started practicing. I got into it because, again, it's not my personality type. I'm introverted by nature. And then I started practicing and went to work for a local trainer of Sandler, being the client. Then I went to work for them, and then I went down to work for Dave Sandler in 1988, and then ultimately became his partner and bought the company.
So do you think that salespeople are born, or can they be made?
I think, well, any profession, really. I don't think that when we come into the world, oh, there's the doctor, there's the attorney, there's this. I think that we're made. I think that it takes certain characteristics. It may, for instance, I said I was introverted. It may take me some more energy than it would take you if you were extroverted. But that doesn't mean that it can't be learned, then I can't do it, right? So if you think about it, we all are out of our comfort zones at certain parts during the day. So I think once you understand that it can be learned, just like a management role, a sales leadership role, a CEO role, we learn over time. And I think that's true in sales as well.
Do you feel that there are certain traits or characteristics that are a little bit more natural in people when it comes to sales, that who are able to do it a little bit more naturally than others? Have you found that in your training?
It's true. I think some are, for instance, people-oriented, whereas others are fact-oriented. You know, I look at the facts and figures. Other people may look at how how does that affect people? Others are introverted, extroverted. But again, that doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means it takes more energy to go outside of your comfort zone to get that done. But I think there are some natural traits that we all have.
Sure. Now, you start out your book by talking about how sales teams generally don't follow the same processes as other departments might, be it operations or engineering. Tell us why that is, and what are the benefits and the drawbacks to that?
Well, I think there's a lot of reasons why. If we start off back in when we all went to school, when it comes to architecture or engineering or medical, we're taught process. We're taught step by step by step, this is how you do it. And so the mathematical equations, as an example, are going to be the same regardless of what type of engineering that you're in. When it comes to sales, many universities or schools don't have a sales program. So we enter into the profession trying to figure it out on our own. You know, when we look around the office to see what our manager does and what top producers do, and it probably takes us a couple of years just to get the hang of what's this thing called sales. And so it's hard. And as you then progress, if people say, well, follow a system. Well, it's taken me 5 years to come up with my own homegrown system, and I've taken the best of the best from people. And if I probably don't want to abandon that, even if it works 10% of the time, I'm comfortable. And so if you say to me, well, put this system on it, now again, I've got to say to myself, well, they don't understand my customers, they don't understand this. So I tend to resist, because I think the other thing overlaid to the fact that we didn't have a system in the school is that most salespeople don't want to be micromanaged. Where we like to be reactive and not necessarily following a prescriptive process because every call is different. And we forget sometimes that there are patterns and we should be proactive. And so I think that's why. Now, what are the benefits? Well, if I look at it from a salesperson's perspective, if I have a repeatable and predictable process, then I know where I am each and every time in the sales process. So if I'm in, let's say, the qualification stage, I know I've got to do pain. You can get the need. I know I have to do budget. I know I have to do decision. So I know that that's what I have to do before I jump to proof of concept or presentation. And so then I can ask all those questions to determine if I want to invest the time and energy that it's going to take to do the presentation. From the sales leadership role, if I have consistent process, then it's much easier for me to manage the sales funnel. I certainly can onboard new people very easily because we'll say, hey, welcome to the company. Here's the process that we follow. And it's much easier for you to be productive very, very quickly versus spending 5 years trying to figure it out. And then also as a sales leader, it's easier for me to train you to the process, coach you to the process. And I think once we have that culture, that sales culture bubbles up and everybody wins.
Now, I know you mentioned sales isn't something that is taught in schools,
Sure.
in colleges. Do you think that that's a detriment and that's something that schools should be starting to do, given whether you're selling a product or a service or you're selling yourself or brand? It's such an important part of what you do as an adult.
I do. I mean, I think we're communicating every day. If you think about what is sales, we're listening, we're communicating. We sell in our personal lives all day long. Where do you want to go to dinner? What do you want to do this weekend? It's happening. And so more and more universities and colleges are coming to us, as an example at Sandler, saying, can we use your curriculum to better equip our younger people into really progressing into the sales world, into the business world? How many businesses or how many sales jobs are there out there? There's millions of sales jobs. We may call them marketing, but in essence, we're generating revenue, we're talking to customers, we're interacting with those that are in or outside of our organization. So I believe it's more important than it ever has, and there's quite a few universities that are now raising their hands saying, we need to do this, we're behind the times. So I think it's only a matter of time.
Yeah. So you are seeing more and more universities, colleges coming to you and actually asking for
In the last 5 years, it's really started to pick up. And so we just had one recently that came and said we've got 90,000 students. That's a lot of students in this statewide. And we're looking to make sure that they're more productive and they can enter the workforce very quickly. And more importantly, we want them to have jobs because it's really hard to find employment out there. And we know that salespeople are hired because if you're productive, they'll be hired. And so it's a win-win.
Now, just going back to what we were talking about regarding process, can you recommend a way for sales teams to actually come up with a process that they can all agree upon?
Sure. Well, I mean, certainly you can go to an outside firm and get a process. You could do it that way. Or you could say, why don't we just take the best of our own organization? And I would suggest that you could get your sales force in a room and say, from a macro level, big picture, what do we do? From the time that we make a call to the time that we are servicing our customers so they buy additional products and services, what's the process that we follow? And really pay attention to your top producers because they do it naturally and everyone does it slightly different. But if you take the big picture steps first and then say, okay, if we have 5 or 6 or 7 steps, then I would suggest after that, your next step would be, what are the 2 or 3 things that we need to do from step, let's say 1 or 2, in order for us to progress? So don't over-engineer it because if you have 78 steps, no one's going to follow it. But if you just say, from qualification to presentation as an example, what are the 3 or 4 things that we have to do under qualification for us to justify the time and resources to progress? And if the people then can add, if you have flip charts on your pieces, on your wall, get everybody's input, then publish it, then it becomes our process, not something that was thrown on us by senior management, not from a consultant, not from an outsider, but this is what we do as a company naturally. And I think then once that's done, if you can overlay your CRM product, then even that will be used far better than it probably is today.
Do you find that many salespeople, because they're also independent and have a different way of maybe doing things, that they all kind of speak their own language that perhaps other salespeople might not understand as much? So is there a way to bring people together so that they are speaking the same language and can understand and sort of learn from each other?
Yeah, well, I think salespeople in general will learn from best practices. We as a sales leader, how do I perpetuate process? Well, first I think through pre-call planning, because most of us don't do pre-call planning, but we should. And if you really focus in on just the basics of what I'm trying to achieve out of this sales call, then we slow down for a second, take a deep breath, and then focus in on what I'm going to do. And I think if you had a 1-hour call, you should spend 50% or 30 minutes in your pre-call plan. And there's probably 6 or 7 things that you should be thinking about and doing. So that's one thing that a sales leader could do. Another is to make sure when you team sell that we're all on the same page about who's doing what. Because we've all been in situations where you went on a team sell, took you 8 months to get to a deal, and it took your partner about 8 minutes to completely blow this up. And not even on purpose, right? It just happened. And then the last, I think, is through debriefing. By asking questions about, well, did you get this piece of information? Did you do that? Then you're teaching the sales force of what's important in each step of the way. But I think lastly, if you and I spoke slightly different languages and we're on the same sales team, It's more an issue when you go from different companies, because we have different products, we have different approaches. But you and I are probably pretty close the way we did it, because we're selling the same product or service. But I think the big thing that you could do is to create a playbook, which is capturing best practices from anyone in the organization and then saying, here's how you do it. It works in professional sports for years, regardless of how successful you are. Why don't we do it in sales?
Have you found that there are benefits to this in terms of sales outcome when you put together this playbook and have everyone have some best practices to refer to, some common processes?
Sure, there's a couple. The ones that come to mind are for new hires. Why wouldn't I act like and say all the things that people are doing with 25 years of experience? Why do I have to learn by the road of hard knocks? That's the first thing. Second is that everyone's great at something, but very few people are great at everything in the sales process. So if I'm great at cold calling and you're great at qualification, then I can add to that part of the playbook and you can then just jump on my success because now you know my scripts, now you know this, versus we all try to protect what we do well because that's our differentiator in the company. Now, hey, they can't get rid of me because of this. It's really short-term thinking. So I think then we get the best of the best from the people. But also, how many times has tribal knowledge walked out the door? That person's been doing it for 25 years and they had the super secret sauce, and then when it leaves, so does the knowledge. And I think if we could just get that, that would be fantastic. So the playbook that I have found has always had benefit, especially when everyone gets to put a little bit in pieces. I think it's overbearing if you say, why don't you create everything because you're the top producer? No, but if everyone got to put bits and pieces in, and it's a living document, it's not done and then goes on the shelf. I think we should always, once a month at a sales meeting, saying, any genius attacks, what's going on out there, that's great for the playbook, put it up, and then it just becomes, as I said, one of those living documents that everyone refers to. I think the last thing is, that let's take sales leaders for a second. How often do we actually interview for salespeople? Maybe not enough. So I don't remember all of my interviewing questions. I don't remember some of those things. So I'd have to go back to the playbook and then just refresh myself as if I'm in real time that I just did it yesterday, even though it was last year. And with all the things that we do in sales and sales leadership, it's really hard to take a deep breath and say, what did I do a year ago? But if I had that playbook, it's in real time.
Can you take us through the Sandler selling methodology, a little bit of it, what it's about, where it came from?
Well, the Sandler selling system has 7 components. We have bonding and rapport, establishing relationships, right? Understanding how you interpret the world. I think salespeople should get paid to be flexible, change the way that they communicate. Buyers don't get paid to change the way they buy, so I have to figure out how do you see the world. The second one is what we call upfront contracts or setting mutual agreement. I think a call that starts well tends to end well. So how do we figure out what's important to you and how much time do we have on the call? And then more importantly, what are we trying to achieve in the time that we have together here today? So that's our second stage. Then we go to what we call pain. You may call it need. And we're looking for 3 to 5 pains. See, I think people buy emotionally and then justify their decisions intellectually. And so most of us pitch our features and benefits. But really what we should be trying to figure out is, do they have the problems that our product is trying to solve? Don't sell the product. Try to sell the solution, but I have to determine whether you even have that problem, because I don't think people will buy anything. And the other thing, I think people love to buy but hate to be sold. So it's important. Then we go to budget, and not necessarily just how much mine costs, but how much are the problems costing you? And how do you budget things internally? And how do you want to do a test drive before you purchase? And all those things that are important to money. Then we go to decision. How are decisions made? Who makes them? When are they made? And all the political nuances that go along with that. And then we go to fulfillment, or you may call it presentation. But we don't do a presentation until we have qualified, which is pain, money, and decision. Most traditional models, presentations up front. We do establish a little rapport, we do a presentation, show you what I've got, and then we do stalls and objections. Well, in Sandler, the presentation's towards the end because we're only presenting your issues, your problems, your pains. We don't over-present. Like, we've been in business 50 years. I could do a presentation on Sandler for 18 days, but that's a yawner. You're just, inside, you're saying, can you solve my problem? That's all I really care about. So we only present to your problems. And then the last step for us is something called post-sell, which deals with buyer's remorse and also referrals and transitioning from sales to service. So that's our Sandler selling system. We have another approach which bakes that into it, which is more enterprise focused, where it's longer selling cycles. You live with your client. And then we roll in things like market planning and account planning, and we do how to make sure that we mutually create our solution. And then we have a whole section on account management where we live with the account to make sure that we've strengthened the relationship and that we can go deep and wide. But the basis that we've been known for 50 years is that 7-step model that I talked to you about.
You talk about setting up upfront contracts and accountability as something that's important to the process as well. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, as sales leaders, we want to make sure that we have clarity, right? That I'm clear when I'm setting expectations, I'm clear when we're having discussions with my sales force. And certainly salespeople want to make sure that they are clear with their prospects and buyers. And so the upfront contract has a couple components. And I think we all are wondering, if I'm in a meeting, for instance, why are we here today? What's the purpose? You know, it takes you a couple minutes to figure out, what are we doing here today? I also sometimes want to figure out, how long is this going to take? You know, is this a 50-minute, a 30-minute? But then we're also struggling with the agendas, because I want to know that you're going to cover what's important to me, and I also want to know what's important to you, an outcome. So there are some components that we cover, which is what's the purpose, then we want to talk about how much time, then we want to talk about agendas and outcome. And if you can do those things, then we can make sure that we have clarity and we have mutual agreement. And as a leader, it's really hard when I say, I'd like you to go get that done. Well, go get that done is a wishy-washy. What does that mean exactly? I mean, what is that? And what's the criteria? And when is this supposed to be done? And I can't hold you accountable if I haven't really buttoned down what exactly I'm looking for, what time frame, and what's my end product supposed to look like when I come back to you in a week. And that's why I think when we're all struggling as sales leaders to get a culture of accountability, I do a ton of executive coaching. Everyone says, David, I want a company of accountability. But yet they don't set those clear expectations up front, but yet they expect it on the back end, and that's the disconnect.
You also talk about one of the best ways to lead a sales team as a leader is through servant leadership.
Yeah.
Explain what that is.
Well, I think especially when you're a new sales leader, you expect, because my business card has the title, which is larger than yours, then you will do what I tell you to do. And that is very hierarchical, right? It's just but that means I'm working for you, not with you. And I think it's the responsibility of a sales leader to do everything that I can to figure out, how can I make you productive? See, I don't think it's the business card, I think it's the relationship. And I, as a sales leader, only succeed if you succeed. And by just telling you what to do all the time, there's always friction, right? But if I can figure out what's important to you, you know, what drives you, and why are you here? Well, I'm here to make money. Okay, I get that part, but what are you going to do with the money if you got your commission check and if you were successful? And once I can tap into that and help you become successful and figure out what drives you and take all the roadblocks out of your way from a sales perspective, then you come to respect me, trust, right? And then I've done my job for you. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do goal setting and coaching and mentoring. We should. But I think I think you should invert the sales organization. I mean, a lot of people work for me, but the way I look at it, I actually work for you. And I personally will go into meetings and say, I'm one of 5 here today. Don't look at my title. I'm going to throw a lot of suggestions. And when somebody who owns this project tells me what to do, I have to get it done tonight. And I'm try to be very congruent, you know, versus many sales leaders, they don't actually do what they say. And so I think if you're going to have that mentality, you really have to follow through. But I think the big thing for servant leadership is to understand what drives you and then also take all the roadblocks out of your way.
You also talk about transactional analysis.
Yes.
And using transactional analysis to better understand how buyers and sellers act.
Yeah.
And why they act the way they do.
Yeah.
Tell us more about that.
Well, transactional analysis is a human relations model. And people buy from people, and they're going to buy from people who they like, right? And so we're all products of our parents, whether we like it or not. And so the model basically, and that for me personally, when I was growing up, I would probably say twice a week, if I ever had kids, I would never do what you're doing to me. Now, I wouldn't say it to my parents because that was disrespectful, but I would say it to me. I'd have a long list of things that I wasn't going to do. And now I have 5 kids. Guess what I do? Everything on that list, right? So I spend half my life denying it and half the life implementing it. It's kind of crazy. And so what transactional analysis says is there's 3 tape recorders or 3 recorders going on in your brain all the time because you're sorting information. One is the parent, right? So as you're a young child, you're watching your parents and you're learning how you're going to be a parent. But within that parent, which is really going on for the first 6 or 7 years of your life, there's 2 different groups. I have critical parent, when you put your hand on the stove, don't. So the critical parent is, you shouldn't do this, you won't do this, I told you to do this. Whenever you're doing the finger thing, that's critical parent. You're judgmental, right? The other side of that is nurturing parent, which is, hey, that's a great job, hey, I'm really proud of you, and it's the nurturing part. So as a sales leader, you don't want any critical parent. You shouldn't be doing this. You should be nurturing. 70% of your management style should be from nurturing parent. Hey, great job there, good job over here. So that's important. The second thing that's happening is that you have a little child tape inside you, which is a couple different things. One is rebellious child, which is when somebody says, hey, don't do that, we naturally do what? Yes, I am. I'm gonna do it. So we rebel. And that's why when you, as a sales leader, you tell people not what to do, they tend to find a way to do it because they're gonna prove you wrong. That's just, they can't help themselves. And the other one is the jokester inside, that kid that tells the inappropriate jokes. And like, where did that come from? But it's a pressure deflector. And then the last one is the adult, which is the only thing still playing today. And that's updating all these tapes. So for instance, my parents told me, don't talk to strangers. And that did make sense when I was a kid. But now I'm in sales and my manager says, go talk to every stranger, go get them. That's called cold calling. And so I have to update those things. So 30% of your leadership style should become from the adult, which is more robotic, computer-like, non-emotional, just gathering the information, dispensing the information. So I think as you start to interact with people, if you're doing this, I know you're a critical parent. And I just have to make sure as a sales leader, I don't get hooked with my rebellious child. I'll show her she works for me. That power struggle. So you just have to sit back for a second and say, okay, that's critical parent, just, come back very vanilla, right? Just not emotional. And pretty soon you'll back down. And that's really, I think sales leaders are cheap psychologists. At the end of the day, that's what's going on. And if I can better understand what makes you tick and what's going on in your world without you telling me, I'm going to be better off. And that's what transactional helps us do.
You also elaborate on this by saying that many sales leaders go into this superhero model where they feel like they must elaborate on everything, and that's, again, not necessarily always a good thing.
No, I think sales, the superhero thing is when we try to solve all your problems. You come in and say, hey Dave, I've got an issue with this, how do I do it? Now I'm sitting doing paperwork, but I came from the sales world, so I want to go back there. Right? So I just psychologically rip my shirt off. I got a big S super salesperson on my shirt. And I say, let me solve this for you. I love this part of my job. And so I say, do this, and this. Now you can't remember any of those things, first of all. And so, but I also, the ultimate goal of a sales leader is to make you self-sufficient. If I give you all the answers, I'm not making you self-sufficient. If I do an analogy, it's like when my kids come home and they say, how do I do this math problem? I said, it's not a problem. Let me just do it for you. And then I give them the answer. They haven't learned anything. So I think as a leader, you don't do the superhero thing. Just say things like, I'd love to help you. Just out of curiosity, if I wasn't here today, if we didn't connect, how would you solve that? And when you ask that question, most of the times they're pretty close. And then it's not my answer, it's your answer. And you also have ownership when you implement it. And when it goes well, you're really excited. And if it goes poorly, first of all, you're not blaming me because it was yours, but you're more apt to adjust along the way. So I think if we can just back down that superhero thing that we do, and sometimes it's ego, and sometimes I just missed that part of my job, just bite your tongue and let them do it.
Tell us about the drama triangle
Yeah.
and how sales leaders can help avoid it.
Well, what is the drama triangle? I think in the world of sales and sales leadership, we want to minimize drama, right? We want to focus out with trying to generate revenue. But there are three different areas of the drama triangle. There is a persecutor, there is a victim, and then there's a rescuer. So the persecutor is the one that says, hey, they're the blamer, right? They're the ones. The victim is, woe is me. And then the rescuer is, hey, how can I help you, right? So let's just do a quick example. If I'm a sales rep and I ask my manager, I'm not going to be able to make a call tomorrow because my child is sick or something's going on, could you go on the call for me? So the manager says yes. The manager goes on a call and it doesn't go well. I mean, they close the file, it's over. Now I'm a victim. The sales rep says, what happened? That thing was supposed to close. What just happened? Now it's woe is me, right? The woe is me thing. The manager rescued me because they went on the call on my behalf. It didn't go well. Now the sales rep is a victim. So what happened? Well, this triangle goes very quickly. You can't be in two different spots. It's like duck, duck, goose. You got to go find an open spot. And so once the salesperson becomes the victim, and then what happens? Well, the sales manager starts to persecute. Well, wait a minute now. That thing was never qualified. You shouldn't have been in doing a presentation. You should have postponed it. They didn't know me. And now I'm the victim, right, as a sales manager. How did I become the victim? I was trying to help you. And it just keeps going, and it's chaos. So I think then we're back to the superhero. Like, I'm going to go help you do things. Be careful, because you could be the rescuer, and there's only two other spots in the chairs, which is going to be the victim. There is a persecutor, and we find ourselves in there all the time. This happens in your social life, and it happens in the world of sales all day long.
You also use something called the DISC behavioral model.
Correct.
Tell us more about that and how that can help sales leaders as well.
So in the world of sales and sales leadership, it's all about communication. And by default, I communicate the way I view the world. And I'm shocked when you don't view the world the same way I view the world. You know, I also think that salespeople, it's easy for me to communicate with others who see the world as I see it. But that's only 25% of the population. You really get paid to sell and communicate to those who don't see the world like you do. So if I first have to understand who I am, then I have to understand who you are as my sales rep or my customer, and then I have to kind of be flexible. I have to change. And so there's 4 quadrants. There are people who see facts and figures, right? It's very robotic. Then I have people-oriented. I have introverts and I have extroverts. So a D, which is dominant, I am facts and figures and extroverted. Those are the people who very quickly want to cut to the chase. They don't want to talk about your weekend. They want to solve problems. You know, they're the ones who cut you off. They stop listening because, okay, I see your mouth moving, but I get it, you know, one of those. And you'll hear things like, it's nothing personal. You know, they're very impatient, those types. And then I've got my influencers who are also extroverts, but they're people focused. So they're the ones who talk 48 minutes out of the hour. You know, for the dominants, a great 1-hour meeting is over in 30 minutes. I love you. Oh, it's awesome. It's done. Whereas the influencer, we circle the airport, how you doing? Relationships are very important. You know, they remember everybody's names. They remember all the stories, you know, that type. And then I've got steady relators, which are people-oriented, but introverts. And those are the ones who, I don't like a lot of change. You know, I just want to do my job. And if I were to do ready, fire, aim, a dominant is fire. Oh yeah, I should have probably aimed a little bit, you know, 80% is good enough. Whereas the influencer would be, hey, let's talk this over, but I mean, what's the wind pattern here? You know, so they're talking. Whereas my S is a plotter, really. They plod along. They're awesome at what they do. They're great relationship people, but they want to make sure things are done right. There's harmony within the group. And then my last quadrant is called compliance. And those are like owls in a way, right? So they're very introverted, but they're also facts and figures. So everything has its place. We want process, whereas the other groups don't necessarily care about the process as long as the end result is there. So we have all 4 inside of us. And I know I am a high D, which means let's cut to the chase. I'm process oriented. And if you spend a lot of time talking to me about the weekend and all, you know, and I'll do it, but it's not something that I really would spend time on. So I think once you understand it and you understand who you are, then I'm better equipped to make sure that I have more patience or I ask different questions. And ultimately, that's the responsibility, if you're doing servant leadership, of the sales manager to change, not the salespeople. And that's what it boils down to.
Have you found that one type is a better seller than another?
Well, everyone says when they go into management, oh, I want to be a D. I want to be the dominant, cuts to the chase, okay. Most people would say that an I, one of the talkers, the talkers are, but really, if you do year after year after year of studies, and we do tens of thousands of these, there is none. It really doesn't boil down to, because you would, there are pods of people in technical sales would be more analytical. It's true. If you have relationships like insurance, it's true. There may be more talkers, but at the end of the day, there is no direct correlation between where you are on the disc dial and your success in sales.
So given that, how do you hire the right salespeople?
Well, hiring is one of those things where we don't measure success or failure. We should, right? But I think the first thing that we want to do is we're looking to hire great people is to, one, get a job profile, which is what we most of the time we skip as sales leaders. And what is that? It just says, what does it take to be successful at that job? So is it a 7-week sales cycle? Do I call on executives? Am I selling a $2 million product or service? Is it a $2,000 product or service? What is it? So that's the what, the job. The next step is the who, the candidate. So what candidate would I look for to match what I'm looking for here? Many times people say to me, David, I hired somebody that's 800% over quota. I said, that is great. But what they hired does not even match the job that they're over here. They're farmers. I'm looking for a hunter, and then they're miserable that they don't fit the job. So the search model, we use something called the search model for candidates, which is an acronym that stands for skills, experiences, attitudes, results, cognitive skills, and habits. And if you think in those 6 categories, like what are the skills that this person would need to be 100% successful at that job profile? What are the experiences that they should have from their previous job that are transferable over here? And then, of course, what are the results? And once I start thinking in those buckets, then I just don't have to wing it. I think that's what most sales leaders do. They wing the interview. And then we say, is there a connection? Do I feel good about this person? Well, that's the gut. You can't take that to the bank, right? And I think if you really measured the cost of turnover, it's about 5 times what the salary is. And most people want to get it right, obviously. So I think if you do those 2 things, job profile and the search model, you'll increase your success rate.
What about for somebody who doesn't have any experience? What is it that you look for somebody who might be a fresher, someone out of college who wants to get into sales?
Well, then we can do a couple different things. One is that we look for experiences that they've maybe not had in the business world yet, right? So what are some of the things that you've done in your social things or in university? Did you lead this group? Were you part of this? So I've got to find something that's transferable over. If not, then I'm going to hire to the best of my ability. Maybe they don't have the experience, but I'm looking for skill. I can do a skills assessment to see if you have that. Assessments in the hiring process, I think, are magical because there's no way I could know enough about you in a 30-minute, 60-minute interview. It's just, I think she's the one. It's one of those. And so I think assessments help when I have no experience. But the other thing that it does, the search model, it'll identify what do I have to train you and coach you to very quickly to be successful or to determine you're not going to make it.
So how do you interview? What kinds of questions should you be asking in an interview to make sure that you're hiring somebody?
Yeah, good question. So the interview questions most people make up on the fly. I believe that your interview questions should only to be uncovering your search model. So you should identify your top 5 or 6 questions that you're going to ask to see if they have those skills and those experiences and those habits and those results. And once you did that, I'm going to go back to the playbook, you should write those down. Because once you have those questions down, you really should capture them for everyone that you interview, especially if you do a team interview and everybody asks different questions. Well, how do you map what our results were? It's hard. So what did you think? Well, what did you think about Mary? What did you think about Mary? But if I know that these are the questions that I'm going to ask, here are the questions that you're going to ask, which still uncover the search model, it's much easier. So there's no magic questions necessarily, but there are if you map them to your search model, which would be different than my search model.
Now, a lot of sales leaders manage their teams using numbers, which of course is important. You know, your quotas, your revenues.
How we keep score.
Right.
Yeah.
Would you say that's the best or the only way to manage your sales team? How does the system go through doing this?
Yeah, well, so we all manage and look at revenue, right? We all set goals. But I think that where we miss it as sales leaders is that's what we're managing. We're managing quota. You have a $10 million quota. So where are you against quota? The problem with that is you can't manage anything that you can't control. That's a big number. If we use that as an example, 10 million, we say, well, gosh, you know, how am I going to do that? I think you should create what's called a cookbook or a recipe. And the cookbook says, what do you have to do every single day in order to get to the number? So we know that that's X amount of sales in our business. We also know that's probably X amount of presentations and X amount of calls. But if you keep going back about how many net new conversations would I need on a daily basis or a weekly basis, how many referrals would I need? How many times do I need an internal referral within an organization? I can control how many new conversations that I have. I can control how many letters that I send out from LinkedIn introductions as an example. I can control that. I can't control 10 million. But if I mathematically invert my sales funnel and only work on the front end of the funnel, then I know that it'll work out at the end. And the people, we've been teaching this for a long time, the people that'll do a cookbook hit their quota about a quarter sooner than not. And I think the other thing that it does is I won't know until it's too late whether I'm going to hit my number. And you know, you and I both know sales leaders here at Q3, Q4, don't worry about it, slow year, but I'm going to hit those numbers. And you say to yourself, how is that possible? Well, as a sales leader, I should be managing their daily behavior. I could say to you as an example, and we open offices every month. When people come into our offices, they need 5 introduction letters going out from LinkedIn every single week. They need 2 net new conversations every single day. They need 1 presentation in front of an association on a monthly basis, as an example. And I know as a leader, that's what I'm managing. And if I do this, they will hit their $10 million because they can control this. And if you said, well, I didn't send out 5 letters, then I'm going to coach and train. Why not? Hey, I didn't do my 2 net new conversations. That's what I focus in on. I can't focus in on where are you to budget. Now, I'm going to deal with that, of course, but I can't control it. And that's what a sales leader really should be doing, is focusing on the things that they can help and the salesperson can control.
And you also talk about the middle ground strategy to help manage your sales team's activities. Tell us more about that based on what you've just said.
Well, I mean, if you think about Goldilocks, it's either too cold or too hot, right? And sales leaders, you've got 2 different buckets. You've got the ones that are micromanagers, and you know, you can't breathe without permission. And then you've got the other ones who I only hire experienced people. Call me if you need me. I'm here. Open door policy. And that's this macro. But in the middle, I think that I could give you flexibility, but still help you design it. So what do? Well, we could do a couple things. One is we want to get that goal, right? Whatever that goal is. Let's say the department goal is 50 million, step 1. Step 2 is I go to you and say, here's your portion. I'll use the 10 million again. So yours is 10 million. And now I've personalized it to you. My next step is to create a cookbook. What do we have to do in order for you to do that? Because once you understand what you have to do every single day, then you have that flexibility, you have that power. And you can get that done on your own, which is really enlightening for salespeople. And then I set benchmarks. So my next step is, let's make sure that we touch base every so often. What are we going to do? And then we create that plan together in order for you to make sure all these things happened, because in sales, we're juggling so many balls, it's really hard to stay focused. You may have a big customer, and I'm making sure that they're happy, but yet I'm not prospecting over here, which is going to come back and haunt me 8 weeks from now, but I'm not paying attention to it. So that's why I think when that middle of the road is, what's the goal? What's your goal? What's the cookbook and the plan? Let's have some checkup points. And that way it gives you the flexibility to do your own thing. But at the same time, if you need help, then we have these check-in periods all the time. And that doesn't mean we're not talking throughout the day or the week, but I give you that flexibility.
So sales leaders obviously wear many hats.
Yep.
They have to be many things to many people, perhaps, lots of different roles. Can you elaborate on the different roles that sales leaders need to transition to on a daily basis when they're
Sure.
dealing with their teams?
So I do think sales leaders have different hats throughout the day, and we're going to have to take them off and on, maybe several times during a meeting, but certainly during the day. There are 4 hats. One is supervision. So I'm going to be supervising others. I'm setting goals. I'm doing sales funnel management. I'm doing all this stuff that you would traditionally know about a sales leader. And that's about 40 to 45% of my time. It's a lot. And that doesn't really matter if you're new or if you're experienced. I should always be doing supervision. The next big hat is trainer. I'm going to be training my people on what does it take to succeed. And I'm going back to that search model, but really focus in on. That's anywhere from 20 to 30% of my time. Also, my next hat would be coaching. How do I coach you in order to make sure that you're as successful as humanly possible? That's about 20 to 30% too. And my last one is mentoring. So I'm mentoring about 5 to 10%. Now that's going to change based on the level of experience with my people, but you should be doing all 4. Sometimes we spend way too much time in supervision. We spend way too much time in coaching. You need the balance. And you really should go back and look at your week and say, what have I done this week and what categories do they fit in? Am I spending too much time in one area and not enough time in the other area? And create your own cookbook for what you need to do.
How do you create a culture of accountability in a sales organization?
So when we're looking for accountability in projects, here's the thing that often happens. I don't know my role in this project. And once you have ambiguity, once you have people not knowing what's going on, it's unhealthy and it's uncomfortable because everyone wants to produce and do a great job. We use an acronym called RACI, which is R stands for responsible. Who's responsible for doing the work? A is for accountability. Who's ultimately accountable for making that decision and the success of the project? C is confer, right? So who do we have to make sure that we've got their opinion, they're on board within a project? And I is for inform. Who do we have to tell what's going on? And oftentimes, once I understand that I'm responsible for doing this part of the project, then I should be accountable for getting that done. It's when we say, I'd like that done by May 13th. Does everyone understand? Yeah. And we all leave saying, well, who's doing what? I think when you have a project and there's some deadlines, we should say, who's responsible for what? When is that getting done? Who do we have to make sure that we contact? Because it does affect them. So how do we make sure that we get their feedback versus creating something and finding out later we didn't get their input, and that's a disaster. So you want to do that up front.
You also talk about something called care profiling.
Right.
That helps the salespeople with their jobs.
Yeah.
Tell us more about that and how it does help.
Well, I think it helps us focus in as a salesperson where we spend our time. And there's different types of accounts. So CARE, an acronym, for K is for what accounts do I want to keep? And I look at my portfolio, and those are the ones that are happy with me, and I'm happy with them. They're profitable. A is what accounts in my territory do I want to attain? I'm going after. They're on my hit list. Who am I going to target? R is recapture. We've lost them, but I want them back. And E is expand. So I'm doing business with them, but I could be doing so much more business with them. And once I look at my territory, then I look at my account plans and I say, well, which ones do I want to really pay attention to? I want to keep. And I have a strategy for them, which is different than attain, right? Because now I'm nurturing over here, whereas attain, it's different. I'm hunting for them. So once I've segregated my accounts, then a couple things happen. Strategy for each of those 4 categories, right? If I want to expand, it's a lot different than recapture. So it's my strategy and how much time should I be spending in each 4 of those categories. And the reason I say that is because some sales professionals will spend way too much time in the keep, the nurture, hey, how's it going? Good to see you. But they spend no time in getting new accounts or no time expanding those accounts. And the leaders say at the end, what happened? They say, but I've kept all my accounts. That's one part of your goal. The other part of your goal should have been, We should have been expanding and doing more with those accounts, and we should have gotten new accounts. So I think as a sales leader, if you can help your people segregate who's who, and then create a strategy for how to attack those 4 categories, and then designate how much time I want you as a sales leader to spend in those categories, then everybody has clarity about what we're trying to achieve.
And tell us, you touched upon enterprise selling
Yes.
earlier. Can you elaborate a little bit more on what enterprise selling is and how it might be different than other types of selling?
Sure. Well, enterprise selling in my mind is where we have longer selling cycles. We have more people involved from the enterprise side, more people involved in the decision process, a lot of different departments, maybe different countries, right? The selling cycle tends to be longer. There's more at risk, which means the dollars tend to be more. And then the bigger thing at the tail end, the sale's not done. When you make a sale, it's really just the beginning, because now I've got to make sure that everybody's happy, the expectations are met, and that we have the ability, we've earned the right to sell additional products to that particular customer. And so the enterprise is almost a loop, whereas sometimes the sales cycle has a start and a stop. With enterprise, there is no start and stop. It just keeps going around and around because of the type of customer that it is. And I think that's important when you have a lot of different people in the sales side servicing customers, like this person's in charge of that, that person's in charge of that. If you don't have a process and you don't have a way to approach it, then everybody does it differently within the same account, and that's very confusing to the customer.
So a regular sales cycle, for example, can you explain the difference between what type of product or service that might be versus the type of product or service you might be offering in an enterprise?
Sure. Let's just take some quick examples. On the one that we all would know, selling a car, that would be a transactional sale. Buying car insurance, certain parts of insurance, that's a transactional sale. All right, there's a start and a stop. That could go for 6 months or 6 days or 6 minutes. Enterprise is where, let's say we're selling a software package to an organization, and I have 6 other products and services, so I'm going to have a longer selling cycle because it's a worldwide organization. I want to make sure that I truly understand the needs. You've helped me build the solution that my software is going to solve. And then my team comes in to actually implement this software under that example. And they know the issues, we've talked, everybody's on the same page, and then we have the ability to go in and sell all of our other software and consulting services on top. So I think it's when you have more than a single 1 or 2 products and services, I'm going to live with you long term, and there's a lot of people involved in the process. And I think when you're selling to a homeowner, it tends to be a transactional type sale. If you're selling to a business, especially with multiple decision makers, longer selling cycles, you have to dethrone somebody, right, because they're already happy with somebody else, it tends to be an enterprise sale.
Now, does enterprise selling require different skills than regular selling?
It does. Well, if you think about regular selling, you're going to have to do that in enterprise selling anyways, right? There is a sales cycle, so let's not hide that. It's the other stuff that you'd have to do. It's almost like an Oreo cookie. So the sales process is built into the middle, but in the beginning, you're going to do some account planning, and on the back end, you're going to do, more negotiations and more servicing. So are the skills different? I think there's more to do. There's more to do. And the focus is different. And if you want to be a true hunter, sometimes the enterprise sales process, you need a good team to support that on the back end, whereas that's not necessarily true in a transactional sales type environment, because you've done it, you've moved on. You've done it, you've moved on. And people love that type of sale, and it's everywhere. And that's true within the enterprise too. As I said, you're going to sell lots of different things through the same customer, so there's a start and stop. But I think that you just have to be a little more customer focused sometimes, because I'm with you for a lot. You have to be more communicative amongst our team members, whereas transactional sales, sometimes I get to be a fighter pilot. I'm on my own. I don't have to talk to anybody about what's going on, whereas it's more of a team sell when you're doing enterprise. So you have to be a good team member. Otherwise, it doesn't go well.
Tell us how you define a quarterly business review and some of the questions that you should be asking during this review.
Well, first of all, I think we should manage expectations of a customer. And I always like to ask new customers, what are the top 2 or 3 things that I can do to make sure that this relationship is 100% satisfactory to you? Because what's important to you doesn't necessarily mean it's important to somebody else down the hallway. So I've got to manage those individual expectations. Now, quarterly business review. Well, the mistake is that we see each other every so often, and there's a million things that are going on. But we should set up a structured meeting that's talking about, how am I doing? And I know we've got all these other things to talk about, but this particular one is I want all the stakeholders that maybe I hadn't seen this senior executive since they've said yes. I'd like to get them in once a quarter and talk a little bit. Hey, let's review how we started. These were the pains. Here's what we've been doing. Here's our interpretation of where we are. Are you satisfied? What would you like us to do differently? Where else could we add value, right? What would it take for us to be fired potentially? Now, you could ask that question any way you want. Most people are like, David, why would you bring that up? Well, because my customer is somebody else's prospect. And so if I don't know what it takes for you to be unhappy, and if I don't know what it takes for you to say, I don't want to do business with you any longer, well, I won't even know when you're unhappy. And by doing quarterly business reviews, see, I think problems tend to fester. If I could meet you once a quarter and you say, well, I've got a slight problem over here in the service issue, I need to solve that now. Versus waiting 6 months, a year, and then it builds up and it builds up, and then my competitor calls you and you've just had this service problem. And you say, well, yeah, I don't know if I'm going to switch, but come see me. But if I did the quarterly business review and I know we've tightened it up and now I know what else is going on, that chances are I've closed the door for my competitor. So I do think I've got to touch base with you. I've got to ask those types of questions. And then it also helps me shut out my competitor, but also fix the problems before they become major issues.
A lot of sales teams complain about ineffective forecasting.
Yeah.
What are some things that can be done for leaders and teams to better forecast and look for the right indicators to help them in their jobs?
Well, I think most of the time forecasting is the lagging indicator. We always look behind us a little bit, where is everybody? If we were looking for leading indicators, the first thing that we could do to better forecast is to create the cookbook. Because if I know what you're doing every day, then I can better forecast what's going to come out the back end of that sales funnel. That's the first thing. The second thing is it's tough to forecast if you don't have a common process. Because that means if I had 15 people and they're all doing it 15 different ways, how can I as a sales leader, it's like me learning 15 languages. How do I know the nuances? When you say it's close, what does that mean exactly? Close. Close what? And so I have to interpret. Most sales leaders have a swag system. When you give me your number, I cut it by 40. This number, 60. And I have this scientific way that I come up with this other number that I'm probably going to bank on. Well, that's a problem, right? So if I had a common process and I knew the 2 or 3 things that it would take for me to progress to the next step, and if you're not progressing, it's okay. And I think the sales leaders, you have to commend people for disqualifying out of the sales funnel. Most of the time we try to shove stuff in the sales funnel that doesn't belong there. It's okay to get stuff out of it. But if you were to do the cookbook and you would have a common process, life would be a lot easier and you'd have a more predictable model when you're doing your forecasting.
Now, I know the latest addition to some of the selling tools out there includes social selling and networking. Tell us how salespeople can effectively use these tools when they're on the job.
Well, let's do social selling. And I'm not even sure that's going to be the term in a couple of years. It's just selling, right? Social selling was coined a while ago, and that's great, but I think it's just the way it's going to work now. So let's do the tools. Well, in social selling, and we can talk about, well, my age group, we don't do that, and I think there's a couple things. You should probably spend 30 minutes a day on LinkedIn or some social platform to figure out what's what. And don't spend 16 hours and don't spend 6 seconds a week. Maybe 30 minutes a day. In a sales process, if I'm prospecting, I should go and figure out who's connected to the type of person that I want to go see. And I could leave you 100 messages, but if we had a mutual connection, then it's easier for me to ask for a referral into you. In that way, I think we should be using it to leverage our prospecting tools. If I'm going to make a call, I should be looking and using social media in some way to do some due diligence. and really figure out who are you following? What's important to you? What are some of the issues? And even if you Google, you learn so much about the companies. It's just the days of showing up cold and winging it are long gone. You know, and study after study will say that the buyers have so much more information before you show up. We really owe it to ourselves and our families to do some due diligence before we get there. And you can do that in each section of the prospecting. We can use it, certainly in the sales process and certainly in the account development process. I mean, how terrible is it when I show up at an account and I realize my key contact left 3 months ago? It's ridiculous. You know, you should have that alert on LinkedIn. First of all, you should know that before they left. But at the very least, you should be, you know, flagged up. Hey, Mary Smith left. What? Okay, now I have to jump into action. I've got to go make sure my account is protected and I introduce myself. So I think you've got to use it as a tool. You've got to be proactive about it and put it as part of your cookbook. I'm going to spend 30 minutes a day getting this done. And I'll tell you personally, it saved me because we were after a very large account. We've spent a long time getting to that point, and now we had a big decision to make how much more time and money we were going to invest. And I realized on LinkedIn, this particular buyer followed my competitors and actually was in a blog. So I said, there's no way they're doing business with us. But I heard what she said, but I watched what she did, and I finally said, I noticed that you're actually contributing to the blog of our competitors. I cannot imagine that you would make a switch. So I'm just politely have to close the file. And she allowed me to close the file. And so what I know about buyers is if you really wanted to do business with me, you would talk me into staying into the sales process. But she said, oh, I understand. It was over. And thank goodness, because we didn't invest a lot of time and money. Did she ever volunteer that information? No. How did I find out? LinkedIn.
What about networking? How can salespeople use networking to their benefit?
Well, I think you have to go into networking with a goal. You know, you just can't show up and hope for the, you know, the melted ice cream and the chicken. You've got to go there and say, I want 2 introductions today. So you have to have a goal. I think you should also show up with a 30-second commercial that says, here's who you are, here are the types of companies or individuals you work with, here are the problems that you solve. And if you can have a great 30-second commercial versus, so what do you do? You know, I think most people go into a networking meeting thinking that something is going to just happen. You know, I'm just waiting for it to happen. You have to be proactive. You've got to walk up. Like, I'm introverted. As I said, I've got to go and I say to myself, I'm going to get 2 business cards tonight. I'm going to get 1 appointment. And that's my goal. It may or may not happen, but that's my goal. And if I find out that you're not somebody that would buy my product or service, I politely move on and then figure out who else I got to go talk to, because that was my goal versus I'm comfortable because you're actually communicating with me. And then I leave thinking, oh, I networked. You didn't do anything. Yeah, you might as well buy lottery tickets, right? You did nothing. So networking is great if you use it proactively and as a tool. So I would say goals, 30-second commercial, and follow up.
Tell us how sales leaders should think about compensation structures when it comes to their sales teams.
Well, sometimes we have control of that and we don't, right? But I think that compensation, you really want to look at what are the goals of the sales force and make sure that your compensation program actually is driving those goals. I can't tell you how many times I've gone into an organization, they say, well, we'd like net new business, but yet the comp program actually pays them on selling to existing customers. They don't get a bonus on selling net new. And so if you just go in and say, well, if you want net new business, why wouldn't you change the comp program? Just hypothetically say it's 10% for existing, but 20% for new. Salespeople will focus on and do what their comp program does. I mean, compensation drives behavior. Let's face it. So if you're going to have a variable comp program, then make sure that it drives that. I also think that you should be doing contests. Have a contest. We're competitive by nature. And, you know, I can do revenue contests, but sometimes those fail because I already know you're going to win. You've won for the last 38 years. But if we were going to have a contest, why don't we do a behavioral contest? How many referrals we get this week? How many net new conversations we get this week? And then it's even playing field for everybody. And as a leader, I'm driving the behavior in the front of the funnel, which is the most important, not the revenue on the back end, which is too late by the time you hit that number. And that'll drive it. So I think we really just have to pay attention to what are we measuring and what are my results that I'm looking for and make sure it's consistent.
Tell us about some tools that sales leaders can use to make themselves better at what they do.
Well, some of the tools that I could use as a sales leader is a coaching tool. How do I have a coaching tool when I meet with people? Identifying the gaps that they have individually, because I think sales leaders make a mistake of managing a team versus individuals in the team. So I should have some coaching tools. I should have debriefing tools. For instance, why wouldn't you print the top 10 questions that I'm going to ask every time you and I talk about an account? Why wouldn't I do that? Because if I print those questions and publish them and give them to you, now you know when you're in front of a prospect what I'm going to ask you. That doesn't mean I'm not going to ask you 500 other questions, but you know I'm going to ask you these 10. You're going to ask the prospect those questions because you know I'm going to ask you those questions. Even a pre-call planner, right? A team cell. There's so many different tools. I think, we've got 60 some odd tools for sales leaders. Does everyone use every tool? No. But if you think about your daily job and the sales process, what tools could you create or use to make your job more effective in each stage of the sales process? But what tools could I use in everything that I do? Like, for instance, as I said, the pre-call is great, but how about a tool of creating a cookbook, a behavioral plan for my people and myself? And I think the more you can create a tool, the less you have to wing it, and the more predictable your people will know this is how it works. And I think then everyone becomes more comfortable and self-sufficient. So is there a magic tool set? I don't know. We have a ton of them. As I said, everyone doesn't use all of them, but I think you have to pick and choose the ones that fit your business and then stick with it. Stick with it, because the worst thing that you can do is start a tool and then stop a tool. Because then once that happens, people don't even pay attention to when you roll stuff out again. It's like, oh, this is Operation Delta, and this too shall pass. If you just keep your head low enough for another 6 weeks, you'll be on to the next tool. Just less is more when it comes to tools.
Okay, David. Well, this was great. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And we'll see you next time on Starter TV.